Hey everyone, this is going to be a discussion about Heidegger's Being and Time, specifically looking at the introduction and the first, second, and third chapter, though in no way, shape, or form a really deep dive into these chapters of this book. This is instead meant to serve as a kind of audio and visual version of my notes, what I would talk about to get students excited, or at least get them talking about this book. And what that means is we need to walk through some of the main terms and the main ideas that emerge from it. So for this talk, I am going to focus really on three things. I'm going to focus on the big idea concerning the type of being that we are. Heidegger uses this term Dasein, which means there being, sometimes translated as being there. I'm going to use Dasein almost interchangeably with human. Heidegger scholars would not really care for that. I'm okay with that. I can take that heat. Heidegger himself, it should know, wrote a letter called The Letter on Humanism, where he takes quite a bit of exception to being associated with humanism, or that Dasein is the same thing as a human being. But there are pages upon pages upon pages of better scholars than I who talk about these issues, and if you want to find them, please feel free to shoot me an email, leave a comment in the comments section of the video, and I'll try and point you in the direction I think is best to talk about those issues. So we're going to talk about Dasein and the human, really thinking about the kind of being that we are. We are going to then talk about the world. Dasein is not just a being that is in some empty space. The there of Dasein's being is the world. What does that mean? And then finally, we're going to talk about one of the most well-known sections of Heidegger, which is we're going to talk about hammers. And it will make sense once we get to it. But before we do all of this, I just want to jump in with some basic terminology, basic ideas that are going to help us understand what Heidegger brings to the table in terms of new ideas and pushing Western philosophy in new and interesting directions. Again, squeaky chair. I'm just going to have to deal. All right. So Being in Time begins with Heidegger talking about how being seems to resist attempts at definition. It seems to be the sort of thing that either people think is empty and universal. That's what Kant called it. Kant said that being was the most universal and emptiest of concepts, and Heidegger deeply disagrees. But Heidegger also makes the claim that being cannot be derived from higher concepts, nor by saying that there is a being that gives being to all other beings. All right, so Heidegger is distinguishing himself there without naming names from Kant, from Thomas Aquinas, from Christian theories of metaphysics, just distinguishing himself there right off the bat. So he begins by talking about asking the question concerning the meaning of being. And even at this very preliminary stage, we just get pure uncut Heidegger, because it's not enough to just ask the question, well, what is the meaning of being? Right? What is the meaning of existing? Well, we have to make sure that we formulate the question correctly to begin with. And so that means that we have to do some reflection. And in doing some reflection, we realize that we have a pre-understanding of being. We have this average, everyday understanding of what being is that resides in the background of our everyday activity. We have what he calls a pre-understanding of existence, just operative. And so when we approach the question, we're not asking this question without bias, without presuppositions. We are instead asking a question with presuppositions built into it about what being is, about how being is related to our being, about the type of being that we are versus other types of beings. And all of this conceptual baggage is not even something that is first and foremost in our minds, but instead it's the sort of thing that is just in the background. And that is, one of the more interesting openings to a philosophy book that I've read, because Heidegger is saying, we're not going to ask a question. We got to figure out how to ask questions first, and we have to figure out how to ask them well. But the problem is that being does not lend itself to easy answers. That's maybe one of the very few things that we could say with relative confidence about being. Our provisional understanding of it is not enough to account for what the meaning of existence or the meaning of being is, but it's a start. And what we need are concepts that are distinct from the concepts that have predetermined the meaning of being. Beings themselves, then, are what we need to investigate. And in particular, we need to look at who is the type of being that can ask the question concerning the meaning of being. Because there's a certain type of being for whom being is a question. Existence is a question. Certain types of beings are going to ask, why am I here? What is the meaning of being alive? And in that regard, we already have an idea of who is going to be the object of our investigation. Because if we can understand who is asking the question, or who is capable of formulating the question concerning the meaning of being, then we will be able to actually formulate the question concerning the meaning of being. Hopefully, at some point. This is all very provisional for Heidegger, 30 pages in. So, the type of being for whom being is a problem or a question leads us to this very first big idea that I wanted to talk about the kinds of beings that we are. Heidegger refers to us, as I said before, as Dasein, that being which we ourselves in each case are, and which includes inquiry among the possibilities of its being. That is how Heidegger describes the being who has, at least as one of its possibilities, the capacity to ask the being question. Moving on. Dasein, in terms of how it was received, is synonymous with the human. Again, Heidegger has a problem with that, and that's understandable, and we can dive into why that might be an area of frustration for Heidegger, why certain scholars would say that really isn't the best way to talk about Dasein. And that's fine. For our purposes, we're all Daseins. We might also happen to be humans, but, in Heidegger's mind, a non-human could also be a Dasein, I guess. I don't really think that it's that important a distinction, but I'm also hearing my grad school colleagues yelling at me in my mind about that. All right. So, if we are Daseins, what does that mean? What type of being are we? Well, as Heidegger moves forward in Being and Time, he calls this understanding of the type of being that Dasein is the existential analytic, an analysis of the existence, the being of that being, for whom its being is a question or a problem. Dasein. Dasein is not just any old being that occurs in the world. It is that being for whom its being is a problem. And an understanding of being is in part determinative of the being of Dasein. The way that Dasein relates to this or relates in this or that way is called its existence. And this isn't a material content, it's an activity. The way of relating to being is the existence part of Dasein. Now, Dasein always understands itself in terms of this existence, its possibility to be or not to be who it is, to be itself. And so we come to terms with existence only in existence itself. We don't determine our being beforehand. We don't have any predetermined essence or purpose for us, according to Heidegger. Instead, we are our existence. We are our being in the world. And we Daseins have this peculiar relationship with the being of beings, such that our understanding of the world is determined by that relationship. To unpack all of that as best I can, I'll say this. We are, as Daseins, beings in a particular place, and we have as part of the kind of being that we are, being in a world. We have as part of the kind of being that we are, the ability to ask questions, to inquire, to question, to wonder. And as a part of who we are, the kind of being who we are, we have a relationship to existence itself, namely that we can question it. What that means is that we are our activity of questioning and wrestling with existence itself. In other words, that which is most determining or determinative of who we are as humans or as Daseins is the activity of wrestling with our own existence. Now, if you're not a philosopher, you're going to go, I have some other things that I would rather wrestle with and that I might think are more determinative of us. And Heidegger would just tell you that you're wrong. I'm not telling you that you're wrong. Heidegger would tell you that you're wrong. This is a very philosophy-centric way of thinking about what it means to be human or to describe the kind of beings that we are. But Heidegger is a philosopher's philosopher, and so he is really going to emphasize that idea. Now, he's also not disconnected from the history of philosophy because, for Heidegger, this is not dissimilar from Aristotle's opening to his Metaphysics, where he says, all human beings by their nature desire to understand. This desire to question, to understand the world, to inquire into it, for Aristotle was fundamental to what it means to be a human. And for Heidegger, what is fundamental for being a human is to wrestle with their existence or with existence itself, the possibilities of existing. And in part 2, I'm going to go into this a little bit more before we move on to talking about the world as a whole.